There's been a lot of anti-Second Amendment effort over the last, well, as long as I've been born. Depending on who's mostly in charge of the White House, typically you see more or less of it, but you always get a little of some of it, regardless of who's there. Recently, what we're seeing is something that I have not heard anybody talk about, which is how the White House has ordered their cabinet, specifically the Department of Defense, to restrict guns. Well, how will the Department of Defense restrict guns? Let's start with, and that's what this video is not about, is the restrictions they're putting on service members is ridiculous. Anybody living on Department of Defense property has to register their firearms. I mean, it goes way downhill from there, but how are they limiting my guns? Well, recently, the White House, in an effort to curb gun violence, announced that they have ordered the Department of Defense to acquire as many civilian rifles from gun manufacturers as possible by contracting with those gun manufacturers to not sell to civilians, but to sell to the Department of Defense. This is kind of a strange thing that, again, I have not heard anybody talk about. I'm going to put the link to the White House's plan below so you can look at it for yourself. But ultimately, the Department of Defense has been ordered to acquire as many civilian guns as humanly possible as to prevent civilians from acquiring them. So many, the number, they don't give a number, it's just permitted by law is all it says at the bottom of that. But ultimately what you have is you have Department of Defense acquiring sporting rifles from companies, making contract with them to not sell to civilians, sell more to the Department of Defense, less to civilians. Normally you wouldn't notice this, you wouldn't even notice it, but the White House is actually bragging about it. Like they're literally bragging about it. You know, we saw Colt stop making civilian sporting rifles, you know, long ago, but now what we're going to see is a lot of other people not making civilian sporting rifles anymore because they're too busy selling all their sporting rifles to the Department of Defense. And who wouldn't want a Department of Defense contract? Of course you want a Department of Defense contract. Now, again, we wouldn't even notice this. This wouldn't even drawn any attention, but the White House just happens to be bragging about it right now in their gun control measures, ordering the Department of Defense to acquire as many sporting rifles as humanly possible under the law to prevent those from ever making their way to the civilians. It's an interesting backdoor thing that again, is not getting a lot of attention, but I'm going to draw some attention to it. And again, I'll put the link below. A very strange way of gun control by having the Department of Defense purchase them all up so there's none for you or me. Interesting. We'll see how that goes. I mean, there's still, you know, there's tens of millions, if not hundreds of them, millions of them wandering around. So I don't think this will help much, but it is going to put a dent in it. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think in the near future, because of this Department of Defense contracting, these are going to become more and more expensive and a little more harder to get as the years go by, because it's an effective way to control the guns by buying them all up. Any thoughts or insights, especially insight, put that below. If you like this video, click like and subscribe. Feel called to support this channel with Patreon. That link is also below. But the most important part of this channel is we take prayer requests, so please don't ever hesitate to send that in. Thank you for watching this episode of God, Family, and Guns. And as always, love God, love your family, and love guns.